Hey, this is Ray Ciervo of No Pad Answers, and this is Apologetics for the Rest of Us, making it simple. And today what we're going to talk about are the design arguments. That's right, it's plural. We're going to look at the arguments that show that there is design in the universe and that it takes an intelligence to make a design. If the universe is designed, then there must be a designer. And that's the thing we're going to look at today on Apologetics for the Rest of Us, making it simple.
Welcome to Apologetics for the Rest of Us podcast with Dr. Ray Ciervo. This podcast seeks to simplify the complex challenges to our faith for the everyday follower of Jesus Christ. You'll discover how to give answers to everyone who asks you about the hope within your heart, as Dr. Ray explains not only what we believe, but why we believe what we do. And now here's your host, Dr. Ray Ciervo.
If you're watching us on YouTube, you'll notice that there's a little bit lighting changing going on, but that's part of our issue here. I'm working out of my study, and I am not a professional videographer nor a photographer, so finding out the right lighting is a little bit of a trick for me, but I think we finally got it there. We are going to look at the design arguments for God's existence, that show God's existence, and show us that in order for there to be design in the universe, there must be a designer, and that there is an intelligence in the design that shows us that this designer must be intelligent, therefore must have a mind, because everything that has intelligence has some mind. And we're looking at an extraordinary intelligence when we look at the creation and see the mind behind it. And that's what we're going to do today on Apologetics for the Rest of Us, making it simple. Before we get there, I just want to talk about the National Conference on Christian Apologetics that's happening this Friday and Saturday in Matthews, North Carolina. That's right outside of Charlotte at Calvary Church on Pineville Matthews Road, the intersection of Ray Road and Pineville Matthews Road. There's the Calvary Church that the conference is being held at. It's been there for the last 3 or 4 years, maybe more. But it's an excellent conference. There are dozens of speakers, dozens of breakout sessions, plenary sessions. It's going to be a great conference. Go to ses.edu to find out more about the conference, and I believe there's still time to register. If not online, you can register at the door. But this is a conference that if you can get to, you need to get to it. It's one that should not be missed. Unfortunately, because of some health-related issues in my family, I'm not able to make it this year. So I'm going to be sitting home waiting for the DVDs and the CDs to come out, or the MP3s, I should say, when they come out, to be able to listen to the things that are there. So that'll be something I'll look forward to doing. But if I could make it, I would be there, definitely. It's a great, great conference. So today what we want to do is we want to look at the arguments, that's plural, for the existence of God. And there are 3 arguments that I use when I teach apologetics to my students. I teach them that these are the 3 arguments you want to use. Now, let me put a caption around that, if I could, and say there's one argument that is just really hands down the best one to use if you don't have the time to elaborate on these 3 arguments, and that is the fine-tuning argument. And we'll come to that at one point during today's podcast. But I want to talk about the 3 arguments for God's existence from a design standpoint. And they are, we use some big words when we talk about these things. The first one is called the Anthropic Principle. It comes from the Greek word anthropos. And that word anthropos means mankind. And really what the argument shows is that there are just right constants in the universe in order for there to be life on earth and even human life, that we would not be able to exist on this planet unless these constants were right there. The earth wouldn't exist, our solar system wouldn't exist. There are things that are just shown to be there. Now, when I first heard about the Anthropic Principle was in, I believe it was around the year 2000, so that's almost 20 years ago. There were only some 20 or 30 constants that scientists had discovered, or at least published anything about, that showed that there was these just right principles. Today, I believe the number is in the hundreds. There's like 150 arguments that, or constants rather, that show that these things have to be just right in order for there to be human life on Earth. Actually, for any life to be on Earth, all these things have to be in place right there. So that's a pretty important argument for us to understand. That's the Anthropic Principle. The other one, or the next one I should say, is one we call Irreducible Complexity. Now, don't let your mind get frozen and thinking about, how am I going to remember these big words? The last two end with complexity. It's the second word in both of them. But irreducible complexity was put forth by Dr. Michael Behe in his book Darwin's Black Box, in which he looks at what we call molecular machines. That is, machines at the molecule level, the molecular level. That there are these machines that all the parts must be present at one time in their mature form in order for these machines to work. And you can go online and you could see some of the illustrations that are out there. It's just a fantastic subject if we want to look at design in the universe. So that is the irreducible complexity argument. Let's call it the mousetrap argument, and I'll explain that why in a little bit. Okay, the last one has to do with language, and we call that specified complexity. And there we look at the language of DNA and see that God used only 4 letters to spell out all of life. Any living organism has this thing called DNA, and it is made up of 4 simple letters. And we'll look at those letters and see what they are and how God uses those 4 letters to make life happen on the earth. That is what we call, our DNA is our chromosomes, the things that are in every nucleus of every living thing. And how people can think that all of this stuff happened by accident takes more faith. That's why Dr. Norman Geisler and Frank Turek, Drs. Norman Geisler and Frank Turek, Dr. Frank Turek, wrote the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Because when you look at all the evidence there is for the existence of God, it takes more faith to believe that this stuff just happened by accident, by a mindless, blind chance argument. That this was just, there was natural selection, just acted in blind, and by being blind, acted on random selections and made all of this stuff happen. You need more faith to believe that than what we have as the arguments from design. So that's what we're going to get to.
If you're enjoying Apologetics for the Rest of Us, we invite you to help support us. You can donate by going to www.nopatanswers.com and click on the Support Us button. You can also send a check to RCM P.O. Box 507, Ocean, New Jersey, 07755. We are grateful you are listening to the podcast and pray it helps you strengthen your faith and witness.
Okay, so I've got my notes up, and just to make sure I don't miss anything, I have jumped over what we call the cosmological argument, coming from the word cosmos, which means the world or the universe. And we've jumped over that because there really isn't very much debate today whether the universe had a beginning. Now, I will come back to it because I believe that when we look at the arguments for the existence of God from the idea of causality, that's an important argument to get to. But what seems to be the most important, or the one that is talked about today, really the ones, plural, that are talked about today, are the design arguments. And so that's why we've jumped over the argument from causality and gone to these arguments from design. It's because I think that these are the ones that are really most important to us, and the ones that will give us the most bang for the buck, if I could say that, when we get into discussions about the existence of God, or whether there is a design in the universe. When we look at what sub-scientists or most scientists say about the created order, how life has evolved, obviously through evolution, that it is a blind, unguided chance that things develop the way that they are. There is no force. It's natural selection on random mutations that have caused these things to happen. And that really is the backbone of the Darwinian argument today. I should say the neo-Darwinian argument today is that it is natural selection on these random mutations that have caused things to be. And there's a great book out by, again, Michael Behe, who wrote the book Darwin's Black Box, called Darwin Devolves. And it talks about how Darwinian evolution, the idea that natural selection happens on these random mutations, really doesn't give anything the chance to evolve. Everything is devolving. And it's another book to get your mind around at some point, or to have on your shelf, or at least get a copy to read. Okay, so we're looking at the design argument, and here's the formal way that this argument is presented. It goes like this: whatever has design needs a designer. The universe is designed, therefore the universe has a designer. Now that's an airtight argument. What you have to destroy is the second premise: the universe is designed. So you have to show that the universe is not designed. We're going to show, at least put our evidence forward, that the universe is designed, that it has design within it. And just because scientists say that, well, it's not a perfect design, well, doesn't mean it's not designed. You can't use that argument because it's not perfect. At least it's not perfect the way we see it. They had some arguments that have since been really refuted about the design of certain things. That's a discussion for another day at another time. And I want to make sure I get my clock going here so that we know how much time we have, and how much time I can give to each one of these things. Okay, so what is the design that we have? I mentioned three before: the Anthropic Principle, or the just right principle, that there are constants in the universe that show us that God exists, or at least that there is design in the universe, I should say. And the second one is our mousetrap argument, irreducible complexity, that there is complexity in the universe that cannot be reduced. You can't take one piece out of these molecular machines, or any other thing really, when you look at it, and still have life, or that being or that entity has existence. And the third one was language, specified complexity. So we have the Anthropic Principle, which we call the just right principle. We have irreducible complexity. We call that the mousetrap argument, and I'll get to that in a minute. And then the one from language, that every language needs a mind, and that DNA is a language. And we'll look at that to make sense of it. Okay, so what is the Anthropic Principle? I've already said that the word anthropic comes from the Greek word anthropos, meaning man or mankind, and it tells us that there is specific constants in the universe that have to be just right in order for there to be life on Earth. Life in general, and specifically human rights. Some people have called it the Goldilocks Principle. If you remember the Goldilocks fairy tale, she goes to the 3 different beds and says, this one's too big, goes to the child's bed, says, this one's too small, and then she gets to the one that is in the middle, and she says, this one is just right. So that's one of the arguments that, or one of the names that we give that argument, called the Goldilocks Principle, that the universe is just right for life on Earth. And there's several ways that we could look at that, and I choose to look at it from, first of all, from the astronomical, or from the view of astronomy. And there's an astronomer, a Christian man, who became a Christian after he observed a solar eclipse in northern India. I believe you can go online and you could see, you look for the privileged planet, and there's a video there that you could watch where Guillermo Gutierrez, I believe is his last name. Sorry, Mr. Gutierrez, if I'm butchering your last name, but I believe that's the right way. But he went to see this solar eclipse, and while he was watching the eclipse, it came to his mind that the sun had to be a certain distance from the earth, and the moon, which was soon to pass before the sun, had to be a certain relationship in size to the sun, so that when it passed before the sun, that it would be a perfect eclipse. That is, that it would go completely over the sun except for the outer rim. And of course you're supposed to wear certain glasses, so you're not looking directly at the sun for this period of time because it can damage your eyes. Well, his revelation, if I could say that, was that this couldn't just be an accident. And part of his research caused him to go and look at all the other planets that had moons to see if there were any of the other ones had a solar eclipse. He did all the calculations for it. And to make a long story short, what he found out was that this was perfect. This was a perfect place, and it was the only place that you could have a solar eclipse, at least from what he could see, looking at all the other planets in our solar system and the ones that had moons. That the Earth was the only platform where you could have this kind of solar eclipse. And it led him to say, you know what, this is not an accident. This didn't happen by chance. This is designed. And subsequently, he became a Christian because of it. I'm going to give you just a couple of other things, like the Earth is in what we call a circumstellar habitable zone. That is, it's within this zone to circumnavigate the sun without being too close to where it would burn up or life would not exist, or too far away where it would be too cold for life to exist. But it's in this perfect habitable zone. Again, not an accident. You could see this again on that video, The Privileged Planet. That is, I believe, free online. You can go and see it on YouTube, that it's there. So the Earth is just in this perfect spot. And then our solar system, sun included, is in a place in our galaxy where we're not being blocked by cosmic dust to where we could see the rest of the universe, or at least more of the universe than we could have been if we could not have done if we would have been in one of the arms of what we call our spiral galaxy. We're in this zone within this galaxy where we can see everything just perfectly clear. Our sun and our solar system are in that spot. So just those brief ones of a solar eclipse, being in the habitable zone, and then being in this one, what are the chances that those things would just happen? Thinking of all the other possibilities that we could have in the universe. And there's a bunch of other ones, like the amount of oxygen in our atmosphere. If it's just right, Again, it's that just right principle. If it was too much, it would just not, too much, fires would break out. If it was too little, we wouldn't be able to breathe. So it's just right. So something like 21% of our atmosphere is oxygen. So you have that part added to it too. So there are just a few of them. Now listen, if we had the time, we could go through all 120 of them, that there are constants in the universe. The strong and weak nuclear force, the force of gravity. There are just so many of them that have to be in existence if we would, in order for us to have life on Earth. You know, if you think about the distance of the moon to the Earth, if it was too close, well, it would get pulled in by Earth's gravity. If it was too far away, it wouldn't be able to stay in orbit around the Earth. And of course, the moon controls our tides, our winds, and everything else, but it's in the right place, and revolving around the Earth at the right speed and at the right distance. So it again, those things just is that an accident that these things happen? The tilt of the Earth, that if it was tilted too far, we wouldn't be able to get the right amount of sunlight. If it was tilted too close, we would get too much sunlight. The distance the Earth revolves around the sun. Again, that's the habitable zone. But these things are just all what we call constants in the universe. Before we go on, we're going to take a quick break and just give you a little bit of information that you could help support No Pat Answers and help us continue to do what we're doing by taking apologetics for the rest of us and making it simple. We'll be right back. Hey, I'm wondering if you could help me with something. If you could go to iTunes, Spotify, and even Buzzsprout and give us a good rating and even leave us a good comment or high comment, that would really be helpful. It would help us get higher up on the search lists. And the same is true as if you download any of these podcasts. The more you download them, again, the higher we go on there. That would be really helpful. Please go to our Facebook website or our Facebook site. It's facebook.com/Ray Ciervo Ministries. And you can leave positive comments there as well, the things that we're posting. All these things help us become more visible. We want to continue to minister to those who want to learn about apologetics, how to defend their faith, and to do it so that we make it simple, that they could get their hearts and minds around it. And that's what we're trying to do. So if you can go to those places, you can also go to our website, leave us good comments there. You can always find my podcast on my website, nopatanswers.com. It is in the top right-hand corner of the page. You'll see the last four or five podcasts that we've done. And that'd be a great thing to do. So thanks for your help. I really appreciate it. Okay, so that deals with the Anthropic Principle. And now we look at this subject we call Irreducible Complexity, or it's also called I gave it the name today, the mousetrap argument, because we want to see what that means. Okay, so most of you, if not all of you, have seen a mousetrap, and I'm going to try to describe it for those of you who are just listening. We have a flat platform, which everything else is built on, really. And now we have a spring that works a hammer. And the hammer is the business end of the mousetrap. But then we have a catch that holds that hammer open, that also has a piece where you would put the cheese or whatever other bait you would have on that to attract the mouse. Well, the idea of the mousetrap is you cannot take one piece of this mousetrap away and it still work. That's the idea of irreducible complexity. That's the idea that you need to have all of these pieces working, and all of them present in their mature form for this irreducible complexity to work, this mousetrap to work. You need all, I think it's 5 pieces if you count the platform, the spring, the hammer, the catch, and the trigger that basically triggers this hammer that's going to come down and catch the mouse. So all of those things have to be there at one time, and you have to have them all not just present but in their mature form. So we look at things through the microscope. Michael Behe looks at things like blood clotting and all the chemical things that need to happen for your blood to clot, and just ask the question, why doesn't blood clot before you cut? Well, there's something of intelligence behind it that causes certain parts of your blood, all the different proteins that make it up and the different parts that cause it to go into a cycle, if we could call it that causes blood to clot just at the surface. And you think if blood didn't clot, a little nick on your finger, you would bleed out and die. There are certain things that are present in your blood. One of the ones that I like best is called the Flagellum Motor, and it is the tail end of a bacteria that drives, if I could say that, drives the bacteria through whatever liquid it is in, whether it's in a pond or could be in a drain, wherever it is. And when you look through a microscope, according to Dr. Behe, when you look through a microscope, this Flagellum Motor, the reason why it's called that, has 40 working parts. And you see shafts and gears and propellers that all work together to drive this little creature, which is microscopic to start with, through its liquid. Well, the question that you have to ask is, how does this come together through natural selection? That is that random mutation that is acted upon by natural selection. How do these things come together? Well, one of the arguments is that the scientists who believe in neo-Darwinian evolution would say that these parts existed in another form and they were co-opted to work into this. Well, that just backs everything up a step. How did that thing happen? Where did the parts come from in the first place in order to be co-opted? But I like to look, and especially when I teach young people about this, I like to look at things that go beyond just looking at natural selection, or rather looking at the molecular machine. My mistake there. And I use several different animals, but for time's sake today, I'm just going to talk about 2 of them. One of them is a red-headed woodpecker. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I'll have all these illustrations there for you to see. But the red-headed woodpecker is a unique bird. Now, I think the more that I've looked at the animals in our world that are created by God, they all are irreducibly complex. But there are some that actually show it a lot better, or at least give us more entertainment when we look at it. And the red-headed woodpecker is a very interesting bird. It's not more than probably 6 to 8 inches in length from top of its head to its tail, but it has so many complex things working in it. The woodpecker is that bird that you hear tapping. I can't even imitate the sound of it, but it's drilling a hole through the bark of a tree, usually a dead tree or a tree that is being attacked by termites or other insects, in order for it to get in there. And so now that it's made it starts banging, and I understand that scientists, medical scientists, study this bird because of the force that it hits the tree with would normally drive its beak through the back of its head. But woodpeckers are the only bird that actually have a shock absorber where their beak attaches to their skull. So the question would come, how many woodpeckers had to die because their beaks were driven through the back of their head or cracked their skull when they were hitting the tree before natural selected acted on a random mutated woodpecker that started to have this shock absorber there? How many had to die, fall off the tree, and just never exist anymore until one just made it? But actually, you would need two, because you would need a male and a female to both be acted upon through random natural selection on a mutation that would make this bird, have this shock absorber there. Well, that's just one thing. It also hits with such force that it would pop its eyes out of its head. But the woodpecker actually closes its eyes, and the eyelids protect its eyeballs from popping out every time it hits the tree. So when you're hearing that rat-a-tat-tat-tat on the tree that the woodpecker is making, his eyes are closing every time you're hearing that tap and opening, so that he could see where to hit it the next time. So again, how many blind woodpeckers did you have before this would happen? I would think you'd have, blind woodpeckers or woodpeckers that have cracked their skull. One more thing. How long do you think a woodpecker's tongue is? Because it's got to get down into that tree. Remember, it's only a bird that's about 6 to 8 inches tall, and we're talking about a bird that has to reach down into a tree and get these insects that are in there. I think that it's got to be a long tongue. Well, it's got a tongue that's about 9 inches long. And so you got to ask the question, first, not even where does he store it? I guess that is the question, is where does he store this tongue? How does he get a tongue that long in the first place? And where does it go when he retracts it into his body? Because it has to come out again. Well, a woodpecker actually has like a coil spring that wraps around its eye, where this tongue wraps up around its eye when it comes back into the being or into the bird itself. So again, ask the question, where or how many woodpeckers had to die of starvation because they couldn't get to this? I think that kind of shows one of the design things about creation. We may not get to all of them today, but the next one is a giraffe. Now, a giraffe is always been just like one of my favorite animals, just because they're so huge and beautiful. But there's certain things about a giraffe. A male giraffe stands around 17 feet high, and his head is about 17 feet high. So he has the largest heart among land mammals, even bigger than elephants, because he has to pump blood up to his brain, obviously in his skull. So he's got this huge pounds per square inch pounding through his arteries to get blood up to his head, which is fine. But what happens when he puts his head down? The force of blood flowing through his arteries that would normally just get to his brain to oxygenate his brain, when he puts his head down to drink from a pond or a river or whatever, the force of that blood would literally blow his brains apart. So how does that happen? Well, a giraffe is the only mammal that we know of that has valves in the arteries, only the arteries that go to his brain, so that when he put his head down, those valves slow the force of the blood pumping to his brain. Question is, how many giraffes got their brains blown out when they put their head down to drink water? Of course, neo-Darwinian evolutionists are going to say, well, it happened in long periods over time. How many giraffes got eaten because they blew their brains out trying to do this? How did this happen? Again, you need a male and a female that both had random selection happening natural selection happening on random mutation that would make this happen. What are the odds of those things happening? But giraffes don't stop there, because now, let's say he's got his head down, his valves are working, it's keeping the blood from flowing into his brain. everything is fine, but a lion shows up at the water hole and he picks his head up fast. Now he doesn't have the amount of oxygenated blood that he needs in order to function, so he just swirls around because he gets dizzy, falls down, gets eaten for lunch. Doesn't happen that way. Why? Because a giraffe has an organ, an extra organ that other mammals don't have, that stores a fresh supply. It's a sponge-like organ that holds a fresh supply of oxygenated blood, so that when he puts his head down, when he picks his head up, he's got a fresh supply of blood so that he can go on and run away, get away from the lion. How many giraffes do you think had to go through the pain of being that dizzy giraffe before this natural selection acted on random mutations and on a male and a female giraffe, and they were able to reproduce a giraffe that could withstand the lion who's grown also. Now this is what's called irreducible complexity. You can't take one part out of this. You take the valves out of that giraffe's neck, and his blood is pumping too strongly, or the PSI, the pounds per square inch, are pumping too forcefully, and it will blow his brains right out. Or the sponge-like organ that's at the base of his brain. How long did that have to take for it to be something that would be useful to a giraffe? How long would it take for a woodpecker to have that shock absorber developed within his skull, so that he doesn't drive his beak through the back of his head? These are questions that just have to be answered by those who believe that Darwinian evolution is the answer for how life evolved. The length of the woodpecker's tongue and everything else. Okay, so that's two of the three. We covered the Anthropic Principle and then irreducible complexity. Now we look at DNA. DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid. DNA, that's what it stands for. And it has a double helix, and the four letters of DNA are just very simply, they are A, T, G, and C. And it is, how many letters do you need to make English an understandable language? Well, you could use these four letters if you had the right sequence to make things happen the way that they're supposed to happen. But unfortunately, we don't have those things in right sequence. We have 26 letters in the English language to make it work. A simple amoeba, which is the smallest of small creatures that lives, has enough information within its nucleus to fill 1,000 Britannica encyclopedia books. So 1,000 volumes in every nucleus. How about humans? Let's take a leap now to what we think is the most intelligent being on the planet, and that is human beings. Well, if we tried to fill every seat in Madison Square Garden, we would have to put 1,000 volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica on every seat in Madison Square Garden to map out all of the DNA in this nucleus of a human brain cell. That's in every cell of a human body. We just pick, because you have the same DNA in every nucleus, from what I understand, and it's just which ones are turning off and on, what sequence they're in, and so on and so forth. And so think of that. Think of 1,000 volumes on every seat in Madison Square Garden. That would be what you would need to contain the information that is in the human brain or the human cell. According to DNA, the language of DNA, it would take all those volumes. Well, we asked the question, where did the information come from? I'll close with this illustration. I was when I was just first out of seminary, I was asked to be on a radio program. A friend of mine had a radio program out in Colorado, and he had different guests on every day. And this one day he had two guests that were with him in Colorado in the studio, and I was remote. I was in my home in North Carolina at the time, and the subject that day was about proving the existence of God. And we were doing it through the moral argument, and I didn't have an open mic. I had to wait until they clicked my mic open in order for me to get a chance to say anything. And the atheist was there, and there was another Christian preacher there who was trying to evangelize this atheist through, I would say, what I would call some strong arm evangelistic methods. And the atheist was being very resistant, if I could say that. And the few chances I had to speak, I would try to reason with the guy. And finally, they gave me an open mic, and basically they asked me, how I would sum up my argument. So I just used this very simple illustration. I asked the atheist if he believed that science was a study of cause and effects, and he said, yes, it is. At least generally, that's what we agreed on. And then I asked him this question. I said, okay, so would you call information or intelligence an effect or a cause? And he kind of went back and forth, and he finally said that it has to be a cause, because he wanted to stay away from the idea of intelligence. He called it an effect, and he wanted to stay away from the idea of calling intelligence a cause. And so I just asked him the next simple question. I said, okay, if every effect has a cause, where did intelligence come from? And we had what we call radio silence. There was no noise going on because everybody was just being very quiet at the time. I said, I do. I said it came from an intelligent mind. That's where intelligence comes from. And he just had to say that gives me something to think about. And I thought, yeah, it sure does. Okay, so we have the Anthropic Principle, Irreducible Complexity, or the mousetrap argument, and then we have the language argument, that DNA is a sophisticated language that spells out all of life as we know it on this planet. And what science doesn't say anything, scientists do. Dr. Frank Turek is very says that quite a bit. It comes from, I believe, our Professor Norman Geisler, who basically shared science doesn't say anything. Frank Turek has a book called Stealing from God. He has a whole chapter on that science doesn't say anything, scientists do. But science is a slave to philosophy. You cannot make a scientific statement about science being the answer to everything without using or that being a philosophical position. Science can't explain math and logic. You have to presuppose them in order to do science. It can't explain metaphysics, which is beyond physics. It's that there's something exists that's beyond all of these other things. It can't explain ethics, why we should do anything and not do other things. And it can't explain aesthetics. It can't explain why something is seen as beautiful. And that is several things that science cannot do. That the teleological argument shows that there is a mind behind it that resonates with you when you see something beautiful, when you see something that ought to be right, when you see it wrong, to know that there's such a thing as a soul that goes beyond the physical world, and that you use math and logic prior to anything else. That these are some of the arguments that we use when we talk about the argument from design, and that I believe in science. I believe science is an honorable and a right profession, but what we understand about science is that it's not the answer to everything. It can tell us about the natural world and give us some exact things about the natural world, but there are things beyond the natural world. There is an invisible reality that things like philosophy and religion and ethics speak to. And those are the things we have to do. Okay, so this is apologetics for the rest of us. I hope I made the argument from design, the arguments from design, a little bit simpler for you. The Anthropic Principle, that is the just right principle, the Goldilocks Principle, if you like. The mousetrap argument, that would be the Irreducible Complexity argument. And now we've just looked at the argument from language, that is specified complexity. And those, we've just quickly flown over those things, but they help you understand these are the kinds of things you have to learn to reason out. And if you have questions, write to me at info@nopatanswers.com and just put in your subject line questions, and I will either answer them online or answer them personally with you, or do both. We welcome any questions from people who are atheists or agnostics. As long as you're civil, I will entertain your questions. If they're not, they'll go right in the trash. So save your time. Please look at our Facebook page, Ray Ciervo Ministries. That is facebook.com/Ray Ciervo Ministries. Our page is there. I'm on Instagram as No Pat Answers, as well as you can find me on the Twitter feed on occasion with at @RCiervo. That's RCIERVO. Once I figure out how to change that name, we will change that name. But we have some followers there on Twitter, on Instagram we're growing, and on Facebook also we have them growing. So visit us all there. Remember, our YouTube channel is No Pat Answers, 3 words. And you can go and see our videos there, and visit my website, www.nopatanswers.com. I hope this has been helpful for you today. Till the next time.
You've been listening to Apologetics for the Rest of Us with Dr. Ray Ciervo. We hope you've enjoyed this episode and subscribe to our podcast. Also, please visit our website at www.nopatanswers.com, where you'll find more information about conferences and seminars. If you have questions for Dr. Ciervo, you can email him at info@nopatanswers.com. Have a great day, and God bless.